Welcome, everyone. I'm John O'Loughlin. This is McDuff Lives, and it's my great pleasure to welcome back to the show our good friend Harley Schlanger. Harley, great to have you back. How are you?
John, good to see you again.
Thank you so much. Lot to talk about today. I captioned our show today, Is Trump really in charge? There's a number of reasons to ask that question recently, and I'm interested in your opinion.
Well, I think there are a couple of, let's just say two aspects to it. One, he seemed to have been caught off guard a week and a half ago when he was boarding a plane and he was ranting about Putin, how he was unhappy with Putin firing rockets and drones into Kiev, and that this is a serious problem. And then a reporter asked him, well, did you know that there had been a drone attack on Putin's helicopter? And Trump said he didn't know. And so that led to a lot of speculation. Is it possible that he just said that to avoid the discussion? Or is it possible that he wasn't briefed? So that's where the first question mark came in. And then, of course, the fairly dramatic series of attacks over the last couple of days, the destruction of a bridge, and then the drone attacks on the airfields. And the question then comes up, did Trump know about this? If he did he say anything about it? Did he sign off on it? If he didn't know anything about it, wouldn't that be the same problem? Now, let's back up a step. There's another aspect here with Trump, which is he does things theatrically. So we don't really know whether he was caught off guard or not. The thing that sticks in my mind about the drone attack on the airfields is that the Ukrainians said this was 18 months in the planning. Now that puts it back during the Biden period. It also could mean very well that the CIA was involved in it, because we know from the New York Times that the CIA had active units all over Ukraine working with the Ukrainians on sabotage. So is it possible that when Trump came in and took some moves to clean up the CIA, that he didn't know about this at that time? I mean, there are a lot of questions here. I think what we can answer definitively is, number one, this was designed to give Zelensky a certain amount of cover in Ukraine, and also to throw off the Russians coming up with the negotiations that are underway, which, it didn't seem to have too big an effect on the Russians, because they're going to do what they're going to do. So that's one aspect of it. The other is, I think there's a potential for an ongoing shakeup inside the National Security Council. I just got an email, quickly, just read it to you. Two people appointed by Mike Waltz to key positions in the NSC staff were just dumped. One is Mirav Sarin, who's a dual citizen, Israeli-US, who had the Middle East portfolio at the National Security Council. She was just appointed about 3 weeks ago, and she's gone now. And there was a lot of flack over that. Then secondly, Eric Traeger, who's a longer-term operative in the intelligence community, was given the Middle East, North Africa position portfolio. He's gone also. These were two people who were just promoted by Mike Waltz. So, is there a cleanup going on? And then the third point here on this question of, is there a shakeup underway? Hegseth went to Singapore for the Shangri-La conference and delivered a pretty wild attack on China. At the same time he was doing that, Tulsi Gabbard was there and talked about Trump wanting peace with China. Now, my question, I think, which will give us a better reading, is where is Rubio on these things? Was Rubio supporting the Waltz people or not? Was Rubio Yesterday, he had a long talk with Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, which apparently went fairly well. So there are so many question marks here. And then the final question mark is, what's Trump going to do about Europe? Because Europe is a big problem. And Friedrich Merz, the German chancellor, is coming to Washington tomorrow. And Merz is saying he can work with Trump. He's a pro-Trump guy. But he's the guy who wants to put the Taurus missiles in Ukraine that can target Russia. And he's coming in as, I'm the guy who can handle this, make Germany great again. And in the meantime, there's a growing sense of intervention coming from the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland. There was just an interview done with Alice Weidel, who's the chairwoman of the AfD, which she spared no word. She said, Germany's policy on Ukraine is insane. So I think we're in the midst of a very turbulent period where there are more questions than answers. And of course, that's the way things usually are in history.
You didn't say Lindsey Graham.
Oh, well, whenever there's trouble, Lindsey Graham's on the site. Also, Blumenthal, the Connecticut senator. They're just no good. And they're pledging to do anything Zelensky wants. There's also, there's a Klitschko, the former heavyweight boxing champ, who's the mayor of Kiev, has chosen this moment to go after Zelensky quite strongly. And this is another factor. Is Zelensky going to use this so-called audacious attack on Russia as a way to put him back in charge, or is he feeling some pressure now?
It's so interesting that attack that cost Russia, I was told, I read something like $8 billion worth of military equipment and runways and things that should have been considered a deep offense, just to put it mildly, by most sovereign countries. However, and that brings a kind of a shadow over the United States, who the world thought, well, the U.S. is running all of this nuclear stuff, and there's this treaty, right, that you keep your nuclear armed planes and capable planes
out in the open,
so that they can be monitored by satellites. And this is an American agenda, and certainly one of the things that we rely upon for peace. And yet Russia was able to absorb it. It must have had some effect internally on people's opinions of how strong Russia is. And then, but of course, the idea that it looked like some act of great courage and planning and bravado. I mean, maybe it even surpassed the Russian attacks through the gas pipeline a few months ago in terms of spectacular media appeal. But it's not hardly being covered anywhere. I don't see it being covered anywhere, and it may be that the only reason that Zelensky would have done it at this time was because he is getting so weak in internal politics. One hopes so.
Well, there are a couple of things just to respond to what you just brought up. It was the Ukrainian Secret Service that put out the figure $7 to $8 billion worth of damage.
Oh, okay.
The Russians are saying that it wasn't 40 planes, because they were initially saying it was 40 planes that were damaged.
Right.
That's what the Ukrainians said. The Russians said 4 to 7. Now that it definitely is an embarrassment, but it's something that I think the Russians knew would happen sooner or later, given that they have such long borders. It's not possible to monitor every square inch. And when you have your army on the front lines battling meter by meter, You don't have the surplus manpower to cover the whole area. And what one of the Russian commentators was saying is that Russia's focus is on the front line, winning the battle on the front line, driving Ukraine back meter by meter, which they're doing. Because one of their demands at the Istanbul negotiations is that all the land of the eastern part of Ukraine, the Donbass and so on, all of that land has to be turned over to Russia. And right now, Russia controls about 80% of the Donbass, or Donetsk rather, but not 100%. And now they're saying the Ukrainian troops will have to leave. And Ukraine is saying, no, you can't dictate those terms to us. So I think Putin is still very much focused on breaking the back of the Ukrainian army. And, I'm sure that he's going to do an investigation to figure out how they could prevent this in the future and what did someone screw up. But in the meantime, the war is going in the direction of Russia. This does not change the outcome of the war. What it does is give Zelensky a chance to strut around and pat himself on the back.
On the U.S. or NATO side, we often look at this as a forever war to keep the arms industry well supplied with income. And the question I have is, what is the Russian side of who's supplying all of the, they got to buy, cells. I know they buy shells from North Korea. That's famous. But is there a Russian armed industry run by Russian oligarchs that are making money out of this war, just like our American oligarchs are?
Well, I think it's a little different. On the American side, on the Western side, the impetus is coming from the so-called military-industrial financial complex, because they have no clue how to solve the financial and economic crisis. They're facing huge debt demands, debt coming due in the middle of next year, in the middle of the midterm election. Trump's pushing this tax bill and spending bill, and he's running into problems with it. So there's a real difficulty from the military-industrial complex, because they're demanding more money. After Trump said he was going to cut the defense budget, he just added $140-something billion more. So there is a necessity for money to go into circulation through the military-industrial complex in the West. Now, Russia, it's a little different. Russia, essentially, they don't want a long war. They know that Zelensky would like to extend this 20 to 30 years. In fact, I think it was Medvedev who said, we're not going to be fighting this 20 years from now. That's why that they're insisting on no NATO encroachment in Ukraine, no weapons for Ukraine, and so on. They're pushing back against the Ukrainian demands quite forcefully. But what Medvedev said is that we don't want this war to continue for 20 to 30 years. Now, who benefits from these long wars? This is the old strategy of the empires, that you keep all the components of your empire fighting. And, you sell each side arms. This is like what we saw with the Reagan administration, arming Khomeini and Saddam to fight each other. So I think there's an element of that. That's where the forever wars come in, because how do you resolve a war like this? You have to have a total commitment from the world community to stop the war. And in this case, we don't have it because the Europeans are acting crazy. In the case of Israel, we may be moving toward that, because there are hints that Trump may be preparing to cut loose Netanyahu and stop the spending. So if that happened, you could see an end to the war in not even the war, the military operations against the Palestinians. But the Russians, they're willing to fight longer if they have to. They're sort of preparing, they're hunkering down for a longer war.
Sure, but somebody is making all of the arms for the Russians, and I have to wonder, is it just are the Russian taxpayers paying for all this? And you know, where's the financing of the Russian arms industry? There must be something, and I wonder if ultimately it all leads back to the same place.
Well, they have been continuing to make money from their oil and gas deals.
Yeah.
Because the Europeans are finding a way to buy Russian oil and gas. And so as long as the Russians can have a market for oil and gas, they can either put the money into their own production or buy weapons from somewhere else. So, and in fact, they've gotten stronger economically from this whole process. So I don't think the Russians are hurting the way the commentators were implying that Russia's going to run out of money, they're going to run out of weapons, they're going to run out of everything, run out of patience.
Well, yeah, it's just what you said reminds me of that report from Iron Mountain and other comments that have, basically said war is good for the economy. We have to have war. It's the best thing going. And
well, it's planned
too. It's a shame about the economics of our world.
It's planned obsolescence. The thing about war is that you don't build a tank or a gun to last for 20 years like you do a tractor. You figure it's going to be ground up in the war. So you have to keep producing them. And so it's sort of a captive economy.
Gotcha. You mentioned Gaza. Have you in your sources been able to see any reduction in the violence and any reversing of course in terms of the genocide? I'll tell you, in my X feed, I keep seeing things that just chill me to the bone of those Israeli speakers talking about, every child in Gaza is our enemy and must be killed.
Well, there are a couple of developments from the last week. I thought it was very interesting. Piers Morgan did an interview with the Israeli ambassador to London, and she's a cold-blooded killer. She said openly, "I have no empathy for the Palestinians." And she said, "We're not killing children. Hamas is."
Mm-hmm.
And Morgan tried to pin her down on that, and she just kept saying, "No, we're not killing children." So the Israelis are still putting out very clearly this public relations stance that any attack on Israel's policy is the blood libel. It's anti-Semitism. Now, along that line, the latest development, of course, the Gaza situation is still very hot. I think there were another 90 Palestinians reported killed today. They're shooting at the few trucks they're allowing to come through. There are large numbers of people looking for food. They're getting shot. So that's continuing. But the other thing that's happening now, there was a conference at the beginning of May in one of the settlements called Ofra. And Ofra is known for having what they call the hilltop youth. And that's because it's up on a higher plane. And the Israeli settlers there come down from the hilltop and go down below into the valley where you have the olive orchards, the Arab farms, and so on. Mm-hmm. And periodically go in and burn a house, kill a couple people. And so what was announced at that conference is that Netanyahu is going to authorize the establishment of 22 new settlements, which will be homes for over 1,000 people. The settlements, of course, are set up in such a way as to create zones where the Israeli army and security forces can act, and it takes away area that would have been contiguous land as part of a Palestinian state. This is what Sharon called facts on the ground. You take over these areas, set up a settlement, and then you say, well, how can you have a Palestinian state? The land's disconnected. It's people who look at these things refer to them as the Bantustans, like the South Africa way they kept the apartheid in place. So what happened at this conference, and the reason I'm bringing this up is you're asking, what's the direction of policy. You had the Ben Gavirs, the Smotrich, the Israel Katz, the hardliners, the hardline Greater Israel expansionists, who were saying, we're going ahead, we're going to do this, we're going to set up more of these settlements. But what was different this time is that you had so-called moderate liberals who were there supporting the same policy. In this case, the supposed opposition figure, Benny Gantz, was just as ruthless as Smotrich in calling for the building of these new settlements. And what he said, Gantz said, this is how you secure Israel, by having these settlements, making it impossible for the Palestinian terrorists to operate freely. And the other person who spoke there was Isaac Herzog, who is the president of Israel, who's considered a liberal Democrat. And he was arm in arm with the settlers. Now, Ofra is famous because this is where in the late 1980s, you had the emergence of the radical youth, the settler who periodically would go out at night and find a small Arab village and terrorize it. And that's the network that's being activated by Netanyahu. And of course, Ben Gvir is the national security advisor. I think he's actually got an official position on national security. He's ordered the Israeli security forces to leave that area, that is the Shin Bet and the army, and to have settler units, settler militia, take over the policing of the area. And so that's, a step more toward chaos and civil disobedience and opposition to them. So I think it's getting worse. And now you have one other factor, though, which is Ehud Olmert, the former prime minister, issued an extremely powerful statement last week, an op-ed, I think it was in Haaretz, where he accused the Israeli government of war crimes. And he's been now doing a series of events where he's elaborating on that. And he's being called an anti-Semite, a pro-Hamas guy by Netanyahu. But Olmert was the one who in 2008 sent the IDF into Gaza in what was called Operation Lead Casket or something like that, which was there had been a ceasefire and it was broken by the Israeli forces, and they killed 1,400 Palestinians in 3 weeks, including over 300 children. So Olmert has a record in the past of being an enforcer of the tough policy of the Zionists, but now he's leading the charge against Netanyahu. So you have an increasing polarization within Israel. And I don't think it's going to end very nicely. Olmert is going onto these talk shows and just savaging Ben Gvir and Smotrich. Savaging by saying that, I'm just saying he's exposing what they're doing. And so it's creating a much more polarized environment within Israel. Now, I saw Olmert interviewed by Piers Morgan yesterday, and Morgan asked him, who can do something about this? And Olmert said, Donald Trump. The only one who could stop Netanyahu would be Trump. And he's using his influence to try and get Trump to do something. I don't know how much influence he has in the United States, but that's why I think it's interesting that today we had this report of these two hardliners who just got removed from their positions in the Trump administration.
You know, facts like these are very chilling. As far as we don't know if Trump can oppose Israeli policy. It almost seems like there may have been some type of deal made in past administrations where the U.S. just says, go for it, do whatever you need to do. You are now running American Middle East policy, Israel, and our hands are off. And then, well, how does Israel keep us in line? Well, this is where I start thinking about, weapons that are cached in the United States and various threats that could easily be made if one had a few dirty bombs in Washington, D.C. that were, hidden, and you could just call up Trump and say, hey, man, you like that city you're sitting in? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's pretty
frightening
thing to speculate about, and most people don't want us to go there because it's too icky to even think about. But do you think that the Israelis have planted stuff in the United States that gives them a blackmail possibility?
Well, I think so. I think what you have in the United States is these pockets of what are called the Beitar youth. Beitar is the name of the Israeli young trainees back before the formation of Israel as a country. And they were basically hooligans who would go around beating up British, beating up Arabs, beating up the Labor Party of Israel. And this is what Olmert calls the Hilltop Gang. Now, they do have operations in the United States, and these were set up by the Zionists after World War I. And the person who set them up was Jabotinsky, who is the one who has this iron wall theory that Israel has to have the force to crush the opposition, and only when the opposition gives up hope of owning the land will they be allowed to have any rights at all. And here we are now. That was in the 1920s, so it's 100 years later. And the Palestinians show no sign of submitting. So they're continuing the same policy. And that's why some of these historians like Avi Shleim and others are saying that the Israelis refuse to negotiate, and as a result, they're stuck in a permanent war. And they've had a couple of times where they've had an opportunity to break with this. And John, one of the lines is that it's the Arabs who keep rejecting negotiation. Now, the fact is that the Arab League in 2002 agreed to the formula that Rabin had for Oslo, which is trading land for peace. That if land would be given back to some of the Palestinian families, the right of return, it's called, if they could get some of their property back, the Palestinian population would recognize Israel and desire to live in peace. And this was part of the Oslo Accord, which said there will be economic policies to provide an actual standard of living for the Palestinian people, that they wouldn't just work as kind of wage slaves. That was rejected by the Israelis in 2002, 2008, and then again 2017, the last time by Netanyahu. So when the Arab population made a concession, it was rejected by Israel. And as a result, you still have fighting. You still have the sense of the justifiable resistance because of the lack of rights for the Palestinians. And if you try to negotiate a political settlement, the Palestinians are going to say it's not going to work because we've tried this and you never follow through. So that's what some of these historians are saying, why we're locked into a cycle that's never going to break. And so some of them, like this guy I mentioned, Avi Shlaim, who's written some of the best stuff on the Middle East, he's now saying that he doesn't believe in a two-state solution anymore. And therefore you have to have a one-state solution. And the problem with that, from the standpoint of the Israelis, is that if you give the right to vote to every Palestinian, to every Arab, their population is going to grow faster than the Jewish population. So they're going to have, by democratic means, the ability to write laws that discriminate against the Jews. And so you have a choice of either supporting democracy and losing your power, or holding on to power and be undemocratic. And that's the paradox that you have with the two-state or one-state solution. So there's no solution within Israel, within the negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And that's why it's a permanent war. I mean, it's been going on since 1948.
And you and I talked the last time we were together, about, I guess, a month ago, about this. And my suggestion, my question was, isn't Israel this way? In other words, it won't compromise. It doesn't mind committing genocide if that's what it takes to accomplish their goals. Comes from the authority to do so that secretly came to them from Britain when the country was first founded by the Irgun. And you in other words, I'm wondering if British policy is still ruling the roost here behind the scenes.
Oh, absolutely. And here's the bad news from the U.S. side. Witkoff, who showed a certain amount of courage and independence standing up to Netanyahu, has taken on Tony Blair as an advisor. Now, Blair ran what was called the Quartet for about 8 years, which was supposedly to resolve the problems, and resolved nothing. But if you look at Blair's record, he's the author of this idea that you have to break with the Peace of Westphalia, that in modern times, you have to have a right to intervene in other nations. And this is the so-called responsibility to protect, that if you have to intervene against a bad government, it's justified. Now, that was used in Yugoslavia to justify the 99 days of bombings by NATO. It was used in Libya, supposedly to rescue the Libyan people from Gaddafi. It was used in Iraq. It was used in Afghanistan. And it was the USAID that was one of the main forces behind it. So USAID gets exposed as essentially an adjunct of the CIA and the intelligence community. Now, some people have been fired. It's been broken up a little bit. But I don't have a lot of confidence that these kinds of regime change operations are being taken down. And so you look at, in Ukraine, it was Biden, it was what's her name, Newland, Newland, who was out there running the U.S. coup against Yanukovych. Now you look at what's happening in Israel, and you have the same thing. And on the scene, you have Huckabee, who's a Christian Zionist, who agrees with the most extreme views of the Israeli Zionists. It's a mess. I mean, it's a total mess, and it goes back to what you just brought up, to the British. because what happened in the period between the end of World War One, well, at the end of World War One, you had two events. In 1916, you had the Sykes-Picot Agreement between the French and the British, a secret agreement, classic secret diplomacy to divide the countries up. Which European country will control what? And then you had the Balfour Declaration the next year, providing a British support for establishing a Zionist state in the Middle East. And then this got approved through the League of Nations after the war ended. And so you had the British Mandate from the 1922 until 1948. Now, during that time, the Brits were building up both an Arab military and an Israeli military. And so in 1948, what happened is that you had all the Arab countries surrounding Israel. When Israel declared independence, they all launched an invasion and they got beaten. And that became a turning point. Then again in 67, the 6-Day War, the taking over the territory. So, you can trace this step by step by step. And what you find is that in the whole first period up until 1956, it was the British. And the U.S., the oil companies wanted to get involved in the Middle East. There were the Dulles brothers and the usual cast of characters were pushing for U.S. involvement. But it was still a little hands-off. It was the British. The British were the coordinators of the coup that brought down the Iranian Republican government and put the Shah back in power. But the British were working increasingly with the United States. And the Suez Crisis was the turning point, because at that point Eisenhower said, we're not going to back you. Get your troops out of the Suez Canal. Give back the land. There was an attempt to punish Nasser in 56 because he took over, he nationalized the Suez Canal. And Eisenhower stood up for American interests and said, no, we're not going to let that happen. And from that time forward, it was chipped away against him. The culmination of this was his military-industrial complex speech, because he knew that's what they were up against. But at that point, the British were no longer the major power. The military power was now the U.S. But the idea of how to run the Middle East came from London, came from the networks around the Kissinger and so on. And that's the way it's been. And it is a British policy. And the U.S., is involved because of oil and because of the geopolitical fight to keep the Russians and the Chinese out. And we're losing that. The Chinese are coming in. They're really gaining enormous headwinds in Africa. So what are we going to do? We have one war after another. Hedgeseth just went to the Shangri-La conference and basically said to the Chinese, we're not going to let you come in and take over Taiwan by war. The Chinese are not in a hurry to do that. But they're being pressured by the United States to make some kind of definitive statement. So we've got a potential war there, an actual war in Ukraine. You've got the situation with Sudan and South Sudan. That whole area is ripe for a bigger than ever blow up. And then they're trying to pull China in by saying to China, look, your economy is going to collapse. But if you work with the United States, we can protect you. And that's the line that's going out right now.
The sequence of events that you just recited it set off light bulbs in my head when you say that Eisenhower stood up to the British.
Yeah.
And he made his great MIC speech as a result of seeing the threats that exist behind the curtain to control American policy and to control the world. Because I think, we might as well just say globalism.
Yeah.
When we're talking about British policy.
Or imperialism.
Yeah, imperialism, globalism, I own everything. It's all mine. Um, you will do as I
You
say.
get out of my yard.
And yet that didn't last. Um, it's quite clear that the attack on America that has existed, since the since the Kennedy administration and including his assassination, has been an attempt to undermine our economy and to destroy the internal unity of the United States in many ways. Uh, just like you said that, empires control countries by having them fight each other. Well, inside the United States, we're getting torn apart by all of these different forces pulling people different ways, depending upon, who you are and what your ethnicity is, or how you feel about homosexuality, or all of these things are dominating our media and pulling us apart. And also the invasion of opiates, fentanyl, heroin, all of this stuff that's been going on since then. It seems kind of coincidental with the fact that Britain lost the military game to us, but now it looks like they're winning the financial and corporate empire game.
Well, I don't think they ever were behind in that one. I think the city of London was at the center of it. And now Starmer gave a speech at a naval yard yesterday, and he laid out the three things they're going to do. One of which is, let me see if I have it here. Yeah, Britain is going to move to war-fighting readiness. That was the first point. Secondly, strengthen NATO to win the war in Ukraine. And third, accelerate innovation to a wartime pace. And innovation meaning for weapons and that stuff. Now, how about moving innovation for industrial and technological advance to a wartime pace? But that's not in their thinking, because they are already in the idea of this big battle, this big war for imperial domination. And they're afraid that they're going to have to fight the US in this, because they want to do something about Trump. Now, that's why Trump and Putin actually have something in common. They're both being targeted for assassination. And this is where we put out a statement the other day. Actually, Ray McGovern tweeted out, what did he say? Something like, President Trump, call Putin ASAP to have a discussion. And that's good advice, but I don't know whether that's going to happen. And I think Rubio talking to Lavrov is not the same thing as Trump talking with Putin.
Another thing, I would have expected Trump, as the president of the United States, which has so much invested in the nuclear treaty that was violated by Zelensky, to have raised bloody hell about this, and to come out and say, you are messing with our national security. Now look what's going to happen. What is Russia going to leave its nuclear arsenal out in the open like the treaty says anymore? Of course not. Now the submarines are going to go hide. Now the bombers are going to be in the mountaintops where we'll never get to them. Now the Russians are going to raise their ability to conduct world war without us being able to do anything about it. And all of this has been brought about by the Ukrainians and those American and other supporters of the Zelensky regime. Why didn't Trump say something?
You know, I often joke about avoiding Trumpology because some of these things that he says and does are so contradictory. And he'll change his mind, it seems like, within 24 hours. So, to try and figure out what's going on in his head, you have to realize he's part showman. He is part serious thinker. I think he really does want to bring about a period of peace, but he may not know how to do that. And his idea that he's going with now is somewhat dangerous, peace through strength. That we've got to have a bigger, more powerful military, and then we can dictate the terms of peace. Well, peace doesn't work by dictation. It works by establishing a principal incentive for two or more parties to work together for mutual benefit. And that's not something you can order. That's something you have to build over time. And on that basis, I think you have Trump at a certain point when he gets frustrated, he looks to see if there's a military solution. And for the most part, he has not been like Biden or Obama advocating war. He's not pushing for a Pax Americana. But that's in the background, and that's how some people are looking at it, and they're saying, come on, Donald, you got to move more troops here. You got to do more to win this fight. And you can't win that fight, because ultimately, if you want to win it, you got to go to nuclear war, and then nobody wins.
War is not the answer. However, your comments there do get back to my question about the destruction, the horrible state of the world economy.
Yeah.
The horrible state of the world economy has been enabled by the governments that allow it to happen. And, one of the great lessons of American history that I've taken to heart is that the government has to control the currency. The government has to lead economic policy for a country to remain sovereign. And it looks to me like the only way to solve this is not with war, but with an economic agenda that that Lyndon LaRouche proposed a long time ago, and that is to resolve all of these outstanding financial instruments that have all of this little interest rates attached to them, and to reform the United States policy towards currency. And again, I think that's something that the empire has basically spent a lot of energy controlling and inserting people into the powerful positions that are going to make sure that we don't do something like reorganize the United States' debt.
Well, and the United States' debt is a glaring problem. 37 trillion. I think it's 9 trillion is coming due in about 10 months. And we're not making enough money to cover that. And this is why there's, again, a contention. Are we going to get a special budget bill to raise the debt ceiling? What's the benefit of raising the debt ceiling if you are reaching the new debt by printing more money with nothing of value? And I think Trump was trying to use the tariff question as a way to say, look, we need physical goods, and we need to make sure that that's what the trade is based on. But then to leave it at that and to reject the idea of a Hamiltonian banking system, you're not going to get there. So that's where the problems are. And we're going to keep fighting to get people to understand what a Hamiltonian system means. And it's not a question of not paying anything for teachers or Medicare or Medicaid or things like that to save money. That's the idiocy that you see the Merz government in Germany doing, as if you can save enough money to cover the debts. So where does savings come from? Well, people have savings so they can make it through tough times. Well, we're in tough times. Savings are being depleted. In Europe now, they're trying to change some of the banking laws in Germany that protect savings accounts
Yeah.
to convince people to use their savings to buy war bonds. And to do that, they had to change the constitution to allow Germany to go into deeper and deeper debt. That was the so-called debt break, and Meritz got rid of that after saying he wouldn't get rid of it. And so now there's total paranoia in Germany, because if Germany goes into debt, who's going to be the motor for the European economy? So we have a conference coming up in Germany which will take this up. There's one other thing I wanted to mention. There's going to be an interesting event this weekend in I can't remember the name of the town now. It's the town where the Rheinmetall factory is that produces the Taurus missiles. It's down near Munich in Bavaria. And the event is going to include speakers from the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, and from the BUSO, from our party. Those are the two of the three groups sponsoring this conference. And what are they saying? We wrote a leaflet that said, if Meritz goes ahead and transfers the product of the factory here, I think it's called Schopenhausen or something, if these Taurus missiles are sent to Ukraine and Ukraine fires them at Russia, Russia has said they're going to hit the plant where they're produced in Germany, which means while you're sitting here in Bavaria making money by producing these weapons, you're going to end up being on the other end of the firing line. And so we're going to try and get that point across, working with the Alternative for Deutschland. And it's very interesting because Vidal, I think I mentioned this earlier, the head of the AfD, did a very powerful interview where she finally took her gloves off and said, this policy of providing these weapons to Ukraine is insane. And of course, what does that mean? It means Starmer, Macron, these other governments are insane. And it's true. So, we're coming to the point where you can't run and hide anymore. You can't hide behind your sophistry or your headlines, or you've got to face up to where you are and what's going on. And it's actually a good moment for people to reflect, to do some thinking, critical thinking. And we have a leaflet that's on the website calling for a mobilization to break with the policy of war. And people should go to the schillerinstitute.com website and download the leaflet and use it to organize. Use it to get other people to start making calls.
Harley, this Friday, June the 6th, is the 54th anniversary of my father's death, the man Thomas F. O'Loughlin Jr. that we call McDuff. And you have been a very important part of spreading the word about who he was and why he's important. And you participated in the 50th anniversary program that we did 4 years ago. And I am going to be showing on McDuff Lives on Friday a selection of the videos that we captured there at the conference. So I just wanted to let everybody know that Friday will be the first play of the video that we collected back there 4 years ago. I intended to produce it sometime before now, but I think it's a good thing to remember my dad in the context of world events and how people, thousands and millions and other people that will never have their names known, had that same heroic motivation to stop these insane wars and to live a life that is human and to respect everyone else and basically have truth and justice in the American way, as Superman would always
Right.
tell us. So I just want to say thank you for all of your support and your kind thoughts over the years, Harley. It's always a great pleasure to talk to you, and thank you again for today.
Well, and I think I'll just say quickly, because I know we're running out of time. Um, you're doing what your father would probably find a source of great pride, because you're allowing his work to continue under the most horrible circumstances. And I think you should be commended for that. And it's not a family thing or a personal thing. It is personal, but it's a way of extending your father's life and meaning at a point where there are very few people who have the courage that he had. And so I wish I could join you on Friday in your celebration, and maybe if you put it up on Zoom, I'll be able to.
Well, it'll be live, and it's just going to be an hour. So I'm just going to be playing video and not doing any live interviews. But I hope folks will tune in and watch it here on Rumble or YouTube or X or on Facebook at McDuff Lives. Harley, thanks again so much, and what an enlightening and inspiring conversation this has been for me. As always, Harley Schlanger of the LaRouche Organization and the Schiller Institute. Great to have you again, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye
Okay.
now.
Bye.